Grief often takes a toll on individuals, leading them to make desperate decisions. This was the exact situation Franklin found himself in after the tragic passing of his beloved daughter. With puffy eyes from weeping, he felt an overwhelming desire to see her one last time. In his desperation, he decided to check his phone, which was connected to the camera in his daughter's coffin. However, what he discovered would turn out to be the greatest shock of his life, altering everything. Franklin, a veteran who had served his country with honor, faced challenges, including the loss of his left leg during active duty. Despite this, he refused to let his disability define him or hinder his dreams. Post-service, he ventured into real estate and achieved the financial breakthrough he longed for. His aspirations included living a life of comfort and luxury, with the intention of caring for those who meant the world to him, especially his wife Anne. Anne, initially a loving and caring wife, underwent a drastic transformation after Franklin lost his leg. Her warmth faded, and she became cold-hearted, especially when they were alone. She confided in her friends about her dissatisfaction, expressing her disdain for Franklin's crutches and limp, secretly filing for divorce. Anne's patience wore thin. However, fate took an unexpected turn when Franklin's real estate business flourished, securing a multi-million-dollar deal that changed their lives in an instant. Anne, driven more by financial interest than her feelings for Franklin, decided to stay. Though she detested his injury, she was enamored with his newfound wealth. She adapted to the situation, shifting from hostility to a facade of caring, love, and understanding. Tragically, Franklin, deeply in love with his wife, remained oblivious to the change in dynamics, unable to discern the difference in Anne's behavior. Unbeknownst to Franklin, Anne had fallen out of love with him and was merely putting up a facade, perhaps driven by her acting skills. As days passed, Anne found herself dealing with an increasing number of challenges, from assisting Franklin around the house to running errands and driving him. Despite the mounting responsibilities, she maintained a fake smile. However, when Franklin expressed his desire to adopt a child, Anne's charade came to an abrupt halt. Furious, she vehemently rejected the idea, expressing her dislike for children and berating Franklin for even suggesting it. Ignoring the hurtful comments about his leg, Franklin patiently explained that he wanted to adopt Clarissa, his best friend's orphaned 2-year-old daughter, who had lost her parents in an accident. After much persuasion, Anne reluctantly agreed to the adoption process, which surprisingly progressed swiftly. In a matter of days, they legally adopted Clarissa. When Clarissa entered their lives, it was evident that Franklin adored her, finding joy in her presence. Clarissa, a sweet and happy child, however, experienced a different reception from Anne. Anne's cold stares and indifferent demeanor towards Clarissa led the little girl to cry and seek solace with Franklin or her caregiver. Observing Anne's reactions, Franklin reassured Clarissa that Anne was just in a bad mood, and encouraged her to try playing with her again the next day. Anne, on the other hand, began to resent Clarissa, believing that Franklin had transferred his affection to the adopted child. She noticed a shift in Franklin's behavior. He no longer begged for her attention as before and stopped buying her gifts. Paranoia set in as Anne questioned whether Franklin had seen through her facade and realized that she was merely enduring the marriage. The fear even extended to the possibility that Franklin might be secretly filing for a divorce. Recognizing the potential consequences of a separation, Anne decided to alter her behavior. She became more affectionate towards Clarissa, even in Franklin's absence. Certain that this change would capture his attention. Remarkably, the strategy worked like a charm. Franklin was pleased to see and warming up to Clarissa. And he resumed buying numerous gifts. As Clarissa turned 3, Franklin went all out to organize a birthday party for her, making her ecstatic. Soon, Clarissa began referring to him as Mom, just as she addressed Franklin as Dad. For Clarissa's 3rd birthday, Franklin gifted her a special doll with a hidden camera in its right eye. Unaware of the camera's presence, Franklin learned about it from the shop attendant, who offered to set up his phone to view the camera's feed. Clarissa cherished her new doll and carried it everywhere. However, 3 months after Clarissa's 4th birthday, Franklin received a call at work about her sudden heart attack. Rushing to the hospital, he found Anne and Clarissa's caregivers in tears. In Anne's arms was Clarissa's lifeless body. The shock was overwhelming. Anne then insisted on an immediate burial. In a haze of grief, Franklin agreed. And Clarissa was buried with her beloved doll that night. Unable to find solace, Franklin lay restless on the couch in the living room that night. Overwhelmed by sorrow, he decided to view the footage from the doll's camera, hoping to see Clarissa one last time. With trembling hands, he brought out his phone and witnessed a shocking scene. Clarissa struggling inside the coffin, desperately stroking her teddy bear in a futile attempt to escape. Filled with fear and horror, Franklin let out a piercing scream that startled the sleeping Anne. She rushed to the living room to investigate. But Franklin, driven by shock and disbelief, had already grabbed his car keys and sped away to the grave. Upon arriving at the grave, Franklin hastily dug it up, retrieved the coffin, and threw the lid open. Clarissa weakly uttered, "I knew you would come for me, Daddy. I was so scared inside. It was so dark." Before losing consciousness, Franklin rushed his daughter to the hospital, where she was promptly stabilized. The next morning, he returned home with Clarissa, leaving Anne utterly shocked to see the girl alive. Initially mistaking her for a ghost, Anne, once recovered from the surprise, pretended to be happy. However, before she could approach Clarissa, Franklin intervened, exposing Anne's deceit. Franklin accused her of being a devil and a pretender. He confronted her with the live video evidence he had witnessed, revealing and giving Clarissa excessive sleeping pills and feigning distress. In the hospital, Clarissa was wrongly pronounced dead. As Anne's secret unraveled, she panicked and started confessing. Franklin, now aware of Anne's malicious actions, confronted her about property documents and a will, all in Clarissa's name. He expressed disbelief at her betrayal and cruelty toward an innocent child. Anne, realizing the gravity of her actions, began screaming and tried to justify herself. Franklin, however, spoke candidly, admitting that he had been aware of and falling out of love with him long ago. Despite hoping for a change, he acknowledged that their relationship had deteriorated irreparably. Franklin, resolute in his decision, handed Anne divorce papers, urging her to leave immediately. Filled with shame and regret, Anne walked out of the house, realizing the irreversible damage she had done. In the end, she recognized the irreplaceable void Franklin left in her life, and the consequences of undervaluing someone until it's too late. The narrative serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of appreciating those we care about before losing them. After hearing this story, what do you think Anne's behavior? Then the next story is about Emma. Let's start to know what will happen. Emma found herself returning to consciousness, uncertain of the force that pulled her back from the depths. Perhaps it was the biting cold, causing her teeth to chatter. Or maybe it was the eerie and unnatural silence enveloping her. A sound unlike anything she had ever heard before. This unsettling silence echoed in her ears, urging her to scream or make any movement to break its hold on her. With great effort, Emma struggled to open her eyelids, heavy as if filled with lead and resistant to her will. Even this slight exertion drained her strength. Through the haze, she managed to discern a yellow chalk-covered ceiling, with lamps flickering dimly. One of them nervously danced on the brink of burning out, adding to the overall eerie atmosphere. Turning her head in an attempt to grasp her surroundings, Emma's scream caught in her throat. To her right was a table similar to the one she was on, and upon it lay a human figure. Yet, it was impossible to discern any features. Just an ordinary human silhouette shrouded in a sheet. Realization dawned on Emma. And in horror, she whispered, "Mom." Her teeth chattering not just from the cold. Taking a deep breath, she cried out for help. The old caretaker, alerted by her plea, rushed into the room, crossed himself, and entered cautiously, asking in superstitious fear, "Is she alive? Or am I imagining this?" Desperate, Emma nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, pleading to be taken away from this frightening place. The caretaker, visibly shaken, called for a doctor. And an hour later, Emma found herself in a brightly lit room with doctors attending to her. The elderly doctor, bewildered, kept muttering about the inexplicable circumstances. Emma's teeth still chattering. One of the nurses brought her an extra blanket, regarding her with a mix of apprehension and reverence. Curious, the nurse inquired about Emma's experience, wondering if it was scary in the morgue. Emma, still trembling, described it as resembling a horror movie, expressing fear that no one would hear her cries for help. The nurse nervously chuckled, assuring her that it was all behind her now. As the reality sank in, Emma realized she couldn't remember anything about her past. When asked about contacting her family, she felt a disconnect, unable to recall any information. Struggling with tears, she admitted, "I don't remember." The elderly doctor comforted her, acknowledging the severity of her ordeal and suggesting a possible concussion. Days passed, and Emma's memory remained elusive. She couldn't recall anything beyond her own name. The nurse handed her a silver pendant found on her when she arrived, hoping it might jog her memory. It was a simple droplet-shaped piece, engraved delicately with her name in swirling patterns. Despite her efforts, Emma could not unlock the mysteries hidden in her mind. Emma carefully secured the chain around her neck, smiling bitterly. "It's a pity my last name or phone number isn't written here. That would make things much easier," she remarked. The sympathetic nurse nodded and acknowledged. "Oh, don't I know it? Your story is just so eerie." Surprised, Emma inquired why they hadn't told her how she ended up in the hospital. The nurse, with a mix of apprehension, shared the details. Emma was reportedly found by a random mushroom picker in an overgrown ravine where ordinary people seldom ventured. This stranger's passion for mushrooms led to her discovery, and the wound on her head resulted from an attack. The words, ravine and attack, seemed foreign to Emma. They sounded like elements from a detective novel, not her reality. She couldn't comprehend how she fit into this mysterious narrative. There were no identifiable tattoos or scars on her body to offer clues about her past. All she had was a medallion with her name engraved on it. Emma. As time passed, Emma gradually regained her strength. A week later, an old man entered her room. Initially unrecognizable, Emma soon greeted him warmly. "Is it you? Hello. Why didn't you come earlier? I really wanted to see you," she exclaimed. The old man hesitated but eventually entered, explaining that he had been worried about her. Emma joyfully welcomed him, expressing that he was the dearest person to her, the first one she saw when she was born again. After exchanging pleasantries, the old man asked about her memory. Emma admitted that her memory was almost non-existent, recalling only her name. The old man pondered for a moment and then made an uncertain offer. "Would you like to stay with me for a while? Just like a granddaughter? I won't take any money from you. My house is in a village outside the city," he proposed. Emma was intrigued by the idea of living in the countryside. And the old man, named Benjamin, assured her there was enough space. Emma hesitated but eventually agreed, realizing the stroke of good fortune in finding someone genuinely pleased to see her. Grateful, she introduced herself. And the old man, smiling, said, "Call me Benjamin. Everyone calls me that." Emma looked forward to her new home, enchanted by Benjamin's vivid tales of village life. On the day of her discharge, Benjamin arrived in his old car, ready to take Emma to her new home in the village. Benjamin looked handsome and well-groomed, dressed in a suit like a groom. The nurses teased with laughter, but the old man responded seriously. "A person celebrating a second birth. There's nothing funny about it." Emma hopped into the car with childlike excitement, her eyes sparkling with joy. She expressed her relief at leaving the hospital, and Benjamin promised that her happiness would only grow when they reached their village. Throughout the journey, Emma eagerly looked out the window, anticipating the sign with the cherished name. Fields and forests passed by until they finally arrived at the settlement. Overwhelmed by the beauty, Emma whispered, "You were right, Benjamin. It's wonderful here." The old man winked, assuring her that these sacred places would rejuvenate her in no time and cure any ailment. Benjamin's house, though quite old, was sturdy. Emma gasped in amazement when she saw the ornate fence. Benjamin explained, "My father built this house when people tried to make everything beautiful and lasting." Emma marveled at the wonder of the house and its surroundings. Assigned a small room with a view of the garden, a flower bed, and the rising sun, Emma woke up to the sounds of birds singing. She found herself helping Benjamin around the house and preparing unusual dishes. Emma was astonished at how recipes for complex salads came to her mind when everything else had disappeared. The complexity and mystery of the brain intrigued her. Gradually adapting to rural life, Emma felt as if there was nothing else in her past. Waking up with the sunrise, surrounded by flowers, she believed she was living in paradise. The shaggy dog, a faithful companion of the old man, quickly became attached to her. For Emma, Benjamin became the dearest person in the world. Gaining courage, she started calling him Grandpa, and he warmly accepted the title. Emma learned the whole story from their neighbor, Mrs. Clark. Benjamin had been a widower for about 20 years, raising his son Joseph alone after his wife's death. Joseph grew up, served in the army, and established himself in the city. He got married, and they had a daughter named Abigail. Tragically, Joseph, his wife, and Abigail perished in a car accident. Left alone, Benjamin had no wife or relatives. Mrs. Clark expressed that it was a good thing Emma had come into his life, understanding the old man's hesitancy when she first called him Grandpa. Emma choked back tears. She realized he must have been thinking of his own granddaughter, Abigail, who was no longer there. Taking Emma in might have been his way of helping a stranger, since he couldn't protect his own family. The following morning, when Benjamin returned from work, Emma greeted him with tears in her eyes and immediately embraced him. Without explaining anything to the old man to avoid appearing gossipy, she simply mumbled, "Thank you. Thank you so much." Benjamin had a hard time calming her down and patted her back, whispering, "What's going on? What happened while I was away? Tell me. Who upset you?" "Nobody upset me." Emma shook her head. "Nobody. I just missed you while you were gone." Benjamin was astonished. "But I was only gone for a day. Anyway. It's taking too long," Emma replied. As a result, Benjamin never found out why the girl was crying. But their relationship became even warmer. Emma started considering him as family. And the old man, in turn, would call her from the hospital to check on her. Gradually, Emma got to know all the neighbors, learned who was who, and even made friends with Elizabeth, sharing a few recipes. However, she couldn't establish any communication with the man living across the street. He appeared very young, around 30 at most. But he was always gloomy, sullen, and perpetually looked down. Emma was even afraid to say hello, let alone get closer. Similarly, the man didn't seem eager to make acquaintances either. At best, he mumbled something like, "Good day," and turned away. At worst, he didn't acknowledge her at all. So, when one day Benjamin asked Emma to take lunch to the gloomy neighbor, she protested. "I don't want to. Grandpa. He doesn't need anyone. He lives like a hermit and never says a kind word. Besides, he's so scary. He looks like a criminal." Benjamin just laughed in response to these words. "Oh. Come on. Granddaughter. Oliver. A criminal? Haha. This guy wouldn't hurt a fly. Even though he's broad-shouldered. Get to know him better. You'll see for yourself." Emma muttered. "As if you would want to get acquainted. All right. I'll take him the soup. Just explain, why should we feed him? Is he a friend? A relative?" The old man replied. "Oliver, it seems, is unwell right now and not working. Offer him a neighborly treat." Reluctantly, Emma filled a small pot with soup and went to the neighbor's house. Only for Grandpa's sake. If it weren't for Benjamin's request, her feet would never have carried her to the home of this grim type. She cautiously crossed the street, entered the gate across from her, and found no sign of the neighbor. Climbing the porch and peering into the door, she greeted, "Good day. Is anyone here?" She was met with silence, despite the chirping of birds. Recalling the scene from the morgue, when Emma woke up in the house, there was no one there to talk to. Pushing away her negative thoughts, she entered the hallway. Right at the doorstep, she noticed work boots with scuffed toes. Assuming they belonged to the owner of the house. Walking into the room, she found the neighbor sitting at the table with his back to the door, leaning over some tools and seemingly paying no attention to anything. "Hello," the girl repeated. "I brought you some food." Initially, the neighbor didn't lift his head from his task. Emma even thought that the man didn't hear her. Then he sighed heavily and muttered. Good Lord. Can't you leave me alone at last? You're annoying. Emma's hair stood on end. And she retorted. Thank you for your warm welcome. You're such a polite person. I must say. Well. I won't bother you further. I'll leave the meal on the floor. You can wash the pot and return it yourself. Goodbye. The man turned around and looked at her in amazement. It seemed like he wanted to say something else. But Emma didn't wait. She turned around and headed home. There. She complained to Benjamin. Your friend, Grandpa, is just a regular jerk. I wish I hadn't listened to you and gone to feed him. I'm never setting foot in that house again. No matter how much Benjamin tried to pry out what had happened. Emma didn't add anything more. She remembered what the man had said to her and was still outraged. What a brute. Such a bore who behaves like that with women. A couple of hours later. The neighbors showed up on their porch. Emma was in the kitchen and saw him through the window but pretended not to notice his arrival. She sliced the cucumber into rings with such intensity. As if she was planning to chop the table with the knife. The man hesitated and entered the house. Stopping at the kitchen doorway. Hello. I brought the pot as you asked. Put it in the sink. The girl ordered brusquely. You probably didn't even wash it. Did you? Why not? I washed it. He replied. Emma remained silent. Waiting for this unpleasant man to understand her disapproval and disappear from her sight. However, he continued to linger nearby. As if waiting for something. What else do you want? Emma finally asked when further silence became unbearable. Do you want seconds? I'm sorry. But there's nothing more today. The dining room is closed. Yes. I wanted to apologize. The man mumbled. Emma stared at him in astonishment. This was surprising. It seemed that the moody neighbor was capable of not only being rude but also offering apologies. I unfairly lashed out at you. The man continued. I'm sorry. Yes. You did unfairly. Emma agreed. Were you in a bad mood? Or is this how you always greet guests and then run to ask for forgiveness? The man shook his head. No. It's not like that at all. It's just that I mistook you for someone else. For this one named Scarlett. She's attached to me like a leech. She follows me everywhere. At the store. At the village council. Even on the street. She thinks that because I live alone, I must absolutely need a roommate. And even better. A wife. I've tried explaining to her politely and in various ways. But she just doesn't understand. So. I thought today that it was her. I mistook you for her and didn't recognize the voice. Emma burst into laughter. Wow. So if this Scarlett had really annoyed you greatly, you could have thrown a knife at her. And I'd be the one to get hit. You're a dangerous person. As far as I can tell. Well. As for the knife. That's a bit much. Oliver noted. But overall. You're right. Please forgive me. It won't happen again. All right. I forgive you. The girl nodded. We all have tough days. Right? Exactly. Oliver agreed. By the way. Your soup was delicious. I haven't had anything like it in a long time. It was restaurant quality. I must say. Say it as well. Emma laughed. Soup from the restaurant? Okay. Let's get to know each other properly. Like civilized people. My name is Emma. The man extended his hand. Oliver. They shook hands. Emma assured the man. "Don't worry. I won't be chasing after you. One admirer is enough for you. Don't you think?" Oliver smiled and walked away. And the girl continued to prepare lunch. After that conversation, her mood inexplicably lifted. It's funny how you can misjudge someone. And Emma had thought that her neighbor was a gloomy loner. It turned out he was perfectly normal and even pleasant to talk to. All it took was starting a conversation to find that out. Since then, they greeted each other when they met. And the girl no longer looked at the ground as she used to. On the contrary, she smiled at her neighbor to show that she held no grudge against him. "Very. Step aside. Who am I talking to?" Emma was fussing with the fence, trying to put a loose board back in place so her dog wouldn't run out into the street. Very took it as another game and hopped around her, as if wanting to lick her face. "What's going on here?" "Very. Stay." The dog didn't respond to the command, only frolicked even more. "What's happening here?" Oliver asked, observing what was going on from his own property. "Do you need help, Emma?" The girl straightened up, pushed her hair away from her face, and shook her head. "No. No. You're fine. Everything's normal. I can handle this in no time if someone doesn't get in my way." The dog happily wagged its tail, as if sensing that it was about him. Oliver pushed the rake he was using in the garden to the side and headed towards the girl. "Give me that." He took the hammer and nails from her hands and then looked at the fence. "We can fix all this. It's not a big problem. But is it worth it? In my opinion, it's time to put up a new fence here. Grandpa is planning to," Emma confirmed. "But he doesn't have the money right now. Maybe next year." Oliver looked at her attentively. "So you're Benjamin's granddaughter?" "Huh?" Emma shrugged. "You could say that. An adopted one. But it's a long story. Let's just say that Benjamin rescued me from a very tough situation and let me live with him. So now, we're like a grandfather and granddaughter. Almost for real." Oliver didn't ask any more questions and fixed the board in place. "Very." The dog tried to lick the man's face, but he gave a sharp command, and the dog obediently went back to its kennel. "How do you know how to handle dogs?" Emma asked, surprised. "Very never listens to me. If only people were as easy to deal with." Oliver returned the tools to the girl. "Well, take care. I'll be on my way." Hobbling slightly, the man returned to his property. Emma watched him thoughtfully. And in the evening, she began to question Benjamin. "Grandpa, who is this Oliver? What do you mean? Who is he?" The old man didn't understand. "He's just a regular guy like you and me." "No. I mean, what does he do? Why does he live alone and always look so gloomy? As if he sees enemies everywhere. No wife. No kids. Some Scarlet seems to be after him. And he resists her. A real hermit. Although if you talk to him, he seems pretty normal. And then there's this limp." Benjamin sighed and set his spoon aside. "Oliver is a good guy. He used to have it all. An apartment in the city and a fiancée. But he lost everything. And now he doesn't trust anyone. He has a scar on his heart. You know. I don't understand." Emma shook her head. "Grandpa, tell me more about him. I don't even know what to think of this person, and it's uncomfortable. I know nothing about him and can't figure out how to relate to him." "All right. I'll tell you." Benjamin agreed. "Oliver is the grandson of an old friend of mine, Henry. He used to live in the neighboring house. Oliver used to visit him during vacations when he was just a kid. I remember him as a little boy running around on the street with the local kids, scaring the chickens. As he grew older, he came to visit less frequently. Henry used to tell me that Oliver joined the army and served as he should. His fiancée was waiting for him, as promised. After the army, he was planning to marry her. They had already filed the marriage paperwork. But then tragedy struck. Oliver was walking down the street and saw a fire in a house. A child was crying and hanging out of a window. So Oliver rushed to save the child. He managed to rescue the child from the fire. But he himself got caught under a beam. Firefighters barely saved him. But he suffered severe burns. And that limp. That's when his fiancée left him. She had been waiting for him to return from the army. But she couldn't handle this ordeal. It was just too much for her. How can that be? Emma asked indignantly. Is it Oliver's fault? And she loved him. It's just unbelievable. Benjamin smiled. You have a kind heart, my dear. You don't see flaws in people. But that girl wanted an ideal. She looked at Oliver, who had a limp, and realized she'd be embarrassed to be seen with him in public. So, she married someone else. And the worst part is, who do you think she married? One of Oliver's closest friends. They were inseparable since school. Double betrayal. Emma whispered. She left her fiancé. And she betrayed a friend. What is this? Grandpa? Benjamin didn't respond to that. What could he say? How could he explain human cruelties to his granddaughter when he couldn't make sense of it himself? They seemed to still live together, raising 3 children. Meanwhile, Oliver is all alone. He had to spend a lot of money on medical treatment. Sold his city apartment. Moved to the countryside. And set up his life there. He organized a construction crew. And he and the guys build houses and do repairs in the neighboring villages and summer cottages. He's well off, I must say. That's why girls take an interest in him. But after what happened, Oliver can't trust anyone. He expects deceit from every person. And it's not surprising. Emma mumbled. After something like that, I wouldn't trust anyone either. But I still feel sorry for him. Grandpa, you can't spend your whole life alone. Since then, every time Emma encountered Oliver on the street, her heart filled with sympathy. She greeted him with special warmth and pondered what she could do to make him happy. When he smiled at her during their encounters, she noticed that behind the curtain, his face remained as gloomy as ever. There was no peace in his soul. And Emma didn't know how to help. You have a hole in your sleeve, she pointed out one day. Even though it went against all etiquette rules. Oliver absent-mindedly looked at his sleeve. I must have been so busy that I didn't notice. I've probably been wearing it like this for a while. Let me sew it up for you. Emma offered. Change into something else and give me the shirt. I'll bring it back in the evening. Well, it is a bit awkward, the man admitted. Oh, come on. It's no trouble for me. Emma waved her hand. So take it off without further ado. Oh. I mean. She blushed and fell silent. Oliver smiled. I understood everything. I'll bring it right away. Now. How about I help you with something in return? One favor deserves another. Maybe you need firewood for the sauna or some repairs done. Firewood? Emma looked around her house in confusion. I think we had some left. But having extra won't hurt. He replied. I'll get the axe from the shed and come over soon. Helping each other became a habit. Emma mended Oliver's clothes, cooked him lunch, and he helped around the house with Benjamin. He chopped firewood, repaired the fence, and fixed the leaking roof. The old man watched what was happening and only smiled into his beard. The young people had no idea that something special was developing between them. Scarlett opened Emma's eyes. That persistent person who relentlessly pursued Oliver. She met Emma in the village store and said with bitterness, "Did you come here to steal someone else's man? Why couldn't you stay in the city? You rich. You just arrived. And you're already setting your sights on my Oliver. Well, I won't give him up. So keep that in mind." Emma stared at her in disbelief, settled her bill with the shopkeeper, and walked out onto the street. She was so lost in thought as she made her way home that she didn't immediately hear Oliver calling her. "Emma. Hello. What's with the knots you've tied? Let me help you carry them." Emma looked at him in silence. Oliver cautiously asked, "Is something wrong? What happened?" "Emma. Don't stay silent. Tell me." "I just ran into Scarlett at the store," the girl said. "She said a lot of things to me." "Did she insult you?" Oliver asked with concern. "I don't even know how to describe it." Emma shrugged. "She said I had my eye on you." "Well, isn't that true?" Oliver asked seriously. "Maybe it is," Emma replied after a pause. Oliver unexpectedly embraced her tightly. "You know, I think I set my sights on you first. And it was a long time ago." Emma laughed and hugged him in return. The young couple soon decided to get married without the need for a grandiose ceremony or flowery words. Benjamin helped with the paperwork and officially recorded her as Emma Smith. That's when Emma realized that the old man had fully embraced her into his family. And once again she nearly teared up. Lately, her eyes seemed to stay moist. Perhaps from happiness. So much good had come into her life. A wedding. Benjamin's acceptance. Even Vernie adored her. They marked their wedding modestly without inviting any guests. Sitting together with Benjamin, Vernie, and their neighbor Elizabeth, who was also happy for the young couple. Emma moved in with Oliver. And it seemed like not much had changed in her life. Benjamin and Vernie were still right next door. And she could simply cross the road and embrace them. The same birds sang outside her window. The same open spaces surrounded her. But now she went to sleep and woke up in the arms of her beloved husband. Oliver had transformed completely. There was nothing left of the gloomy stranger Emma had met at the beginning of her rural life. He laughed, joked, and was willing to carry his beloved wife in his arms. Emma had even stopped dwelling on her past. What did it matter what had happened there when her present was so wonderful? However, the past reminded her of its existence and intruded into her life unexpectedly. It was a typical Sunday morning. And Emma was preparing breakfast. The local news was on TV. Something about supporting entrepreneurs and businesses. The host announced that they would now show an interview with Mr. James, the owner of a trendy fashion studio. Emma looked at the screen. And the name the host mentioned struck her as familiar. And not just the name. She suddenly realized that she knew this tall, dark-haired man very well. Emma dropped the frying pan and clutched her chest. "What's happened?" Oliver entered the kitchen. "Darling. What's wrong with you? Are you feeling unwell? Please say something." Emma continued to stare at the screen, her lips trembling. I know this man." Oliver looked at the screen with confusion. "James? Who is that?" Wait a minute. You're saying you know him. Does that mean? Does it mean you've remembered something? Emma nodded. And who is he? Oliver asked. His voice filled with curiosity. Did you work together? Or perhaps he's your brother? No. No. Oliver. Emma said with a heavy heart. He's my husband. Her memories returned slowly. Gradually. This was a blessing. Otherwise, she might have gone insane. I had a grandmother named Amelia. She told Oliver and Benjamin. My parents died when I was 7. And my grandmother raised me on her own. She was very kind and devoted her whole life to me. She focused on me and her business. And there was nothing else in her life. Her business. Oliver tried to joke. So does that mean my wife is a wealthy lady? Lucky me. Emma gave a faint smile. Initially, it was just a small studio. My grandmother was an excellent seamstress. And it became her life's work. When I grew up, I started helping her. I obtained 2 degrees. One in fashion and one in economics. I took over all the business matters. What about your grandmother? My grandmother passed away a few years ago. Emma hesitated and fell silent for a while. Unable to continue her story. Oliver took her hand. We're sorry. Emma. It feels like it happened a long time ago. But now when I remember it, it hurts just like the first time. Benjamin also hugged her. She sighed. But I managed. Developed the business. Made our studio the best in town. Do you know what kind of clients we had? Even the mayor's wife visited us. And then I met James. At the mention of this name, Oliver lowered his gaze. He had never been able to come to terms with the idea that his wife had been married to someone else. He hadn't met this James in person, but he had already developed a deep resentment for the man trying to steal his wife. He was our business partner. Emma continued. He dealt with fabrics. Initially, our relationship was strictly business. And I didn't pay much attention to him. But then James started pursuing me. Giving me flowers. And inviting me to cafes after work. Spare me the details. Oliver requested. It's hard to listen to this. It's hard for me to remember. Emma agreed. All right. I'll say just one thing. Eventually. I believe that scoundrel. And I agreed to marry him. Scoundrel? Oliver asked skeptically. At the time, I didn't know who I was getting involved with. Emma said. It was only later that I realized it. But by then it was already too late. We lived normally for the first year or even 2. We worked. Managed the studio. And went to the seaside a couple of times. But even there, we spent most of the time on business discussions. It seems it was starting to get on James's nerves. I didn't even suspect that he had someone else. At the time, Benjamin shook his head. And Oliver mumbled. You call him a scoundrel. But to me, that's putting it mildly. I'd use stronger words. We had a large apartment. Emma continued. Beautiful and bright. Unfortunately, due to work, I hardly had any time to clean. I asked James to hire a maid for us. Well, he did pick one for us. But not based on professional criteria but rather appearance. Mia was quite a stunner. A real fashion model. I even developed an inferiority complex next to her. I couldn't keep up with her. I was working. Working. Who had time for self-care? It seems that James shifted his attention to her. You're the most beautiful to me, whispered Oliver. You can believe me. I do believe you. Emma smiled. Only you and Benjamin. Well. And also. Trusty very. You won't deceive me. Emma sighed heavily and continued her story. Once I had to go on a business trip. James pretended to be sick and stayed home while I went alone. I later found out he was lying. When I returned home, I found him in bed with Mia. I don't know how I managed not to confront her violently, as it seemed like too sordid a story to get involved in. I told James that I would file for divorce, turned around, and slammed the door behind me. So you're divorced now? Oliver asked with hidden hope. Well, it's complicated, Emma noted. In practice, we never formalized the divorce. James called me for a meeting. I didn't want to see or talk to him, but he begged me to come. And then I think he hit me on the head with something. And I don't remember anything else. I woke up in the morgue. And that's when Benjamin and I met. The old man nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. Oliver mumbled. I'm going to kill him. No. Please don't. Emma said with concern. Now that I've remembered everything, I can go to the police. But first, I need to find out how my ex-husband is doing. I think I should go to the city and meet with my friend. If anyone knows what's happening right now, it's Grace. She was always up to date with the news. Oliver looked at his wife, not recognizing her. She was resolute and unwavering. A true businesswoman. But then Emma smiled and returned to her usual self. Friendly and gentle. Of course. We'll go together. She said. You won't leave me. Will you? I'm with you all the way. Oliver confidently replied and hugged his wife. The young couple headed to the city the next day. I hope Grace is at home. Emma fretted the entire way, fiddling with her fingers. What if she got married? Moved? Or just went on vacation? What would we do then? Don't worry. Too soon. Oliver reassured her. Even if your friend isn't home, we can go straight to the police. No need to waste time. Fortunately, her fears weren't realized. Grace was indeed home. And she was almost in shock when she opened the door and saw her friend on the doorstep. Emma. She said, bewildered. Is it really you? You're alive. More alive than anyone. Emma smiled. If you don't believe me, let's hug. Honestly, I can't wait to do that. We haven't seen each other in so long. Grace hugged her friend and cautiously looked at Oliver. And who's this with you? My husband. Emma replied. Please meet Grace. Oliver. This is Grace. Her friend nodded hesitantly and asked cautiously. What about James? That's exactly what we've come to talk about. Emma said in a serious tone. Can you tell me how my ex is doing? Is he alive and well? As I understand it. And perhaps even married? You guessed it. Grace said. He got married almost immediately after your accident to that vulgar woman Lily. I think. They went on another honeymoon. The second time they're enjoying warm countries. Your atelier has really gone downhill. Exactly what used to be mine. Thank you. Grace. We'll meet again and talk soon. For now, I need to handle business. Clean up the mess my ex-husband created. Where are we heading now? Oliver asked as they left the apartment building. Back to your place? No. We'll go there later. Emma shook her head. Right now. We need to go to another place. Another village. But not this one, We'll visit our ancestral nest with my grandmother and make sure everything is in order. Throughout the journey, Oliver attempted to extract the details from her, but to no avail. Emma was very anxious. What if he sold our house? James is capable of that if he inherited my property. But then again, they never found my body. I disappeared without a trace. Right? So does that mean everything still belongs to me? Of course. My love. Oliver reassured her. I don't like this situation at all. And I think we should go to the police and put an end to it. We will definitely go. Emma agreed. But later. First, I need to check on something. The house where Emma spent her childhood strongly resembled Benjamin's cottage. It had the same ornate windowsills and an old, slightly crooked fence. Emma took a deep breath and smiled. She now understood why she felt so drawn to the old man. While she couldn't remember anything, her consciousness recognized the familiar surroundings. The old man also reminded her of her late grandmother. They truly were kindred spirits. And Emma was now completely convinced of that. Over by the woodshed, Emma murmured, "Please help me move these logs." Oliver did as she asked and whistled when he saw what was behind them, a safe. "Wow. You and your grandmother meant business," he remarked. "She taught me never to trust anyone," Emma muttered. And she was probably right. Judging by how it all turned out, the safe seemed untouched. Let's see what's inside. She entered the code silently, praying that her memory wouldn't fail her. To her relief, the numbers were correct. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. "It's here," Emma whispered. "The documents are here. And the money too. Well, James. Hang on. Now let's find out who owns the company. The apartment. And all the luxury you used to have." They finally headed to the police. The very place Oliver would have preferred to go from the beginning. Emma's story made an impression even on seasoned police officers. Later, Emma turned to her husband. "Oliver. I will probably need a lawyer. Will you help?" Her husband nodded seriously. "Are you even asking?" Of course. James had 5 days of vacation left. And Emma spent them on pins and needles. "I never thought I'd be waiting for him to return," she told her husband. "It feels like I didn't wait for Santa Claus with this much anticipation when I was a child. I want to look him in the eyes. Hear what he says. Though. Are you really alive? As Benjamin and Grace said. Or will he feign happiness? Pretend it's not him. He tried to kill me. He'll start lying. Wriggling. We'll find out soon enough," Oliver assured her. "Either way, he'll get what he deserves. Don't you doubt it." They set up a stakeout right in the apartment. Emma rarely received guests in this place and was somewhat bewildered at the colorful company that had gathered here. Police officers. A lawyer. Her and Oliver. It wouldn't have hurt to bring in Vernie too, in case that scoundrel tried to escape. But luckily it wasn't necessary. James reacted very emotionally to the sight of his wife. It was understandable. The man was completely convinced of her death and probably even had a memorial service for her. And now, this unexpected surprise. "You survived," he mumbled, dropping his suitcase. "But how? Didn't I?" He glanced at those present and fell silent. The lawyer snorted. "Ichem. Does anyone need any more evidence? It seems quite clear to me. James was arrested. Mia, his wife, testified in court. Emma had no intention of seeking revenge against her. She observed with a mix of disgust and pity as the painted woman defended herself. "I'm not guilty of anything. I wasn't involved. James later told me everything. It's his fault. All his. He's the killer. He should be on trial. He threatened me so that I wouldn't spill the beans to anyone. Besides, I have mitigating circumstances. I'm pregnant." She burst into tears. And Emma winced but chose not to insist on her punishment. However, James received the full extent of the law. As she left the courtroom, Emma emerged as the victor. "You showed her leniency, didn't you?" Oliver asked as they were driving home. "Well, for that woman. You know, I admire you. I couldn't forgive a friend who once stole my girlfriend. Maybe she's at fault." Emma muttered thoughtfully. "But the child. I decided to let them live as they want. Maybe Mia will come to her senses. And this experience will be a lesson for her. Or maybe I was just thinking about the child and didn't want such a fate for someone else." Oliver looked at her in amazement. "What did you say? You were thinking about the child. Are you pregnant?" Emma smiled. "Surprise. I wanted to tell you this after the trial. And now I'm telling you." Oliver pulled the car over to the side of the road and embraced his wife. They were returning to their village. To their family and loved ones. They were coming back home.